Act, making appropriations for the fiscal year 2023 to provide for certain certain existing appropriations and for certain other activities and projects. This act includes an extension until March 31 of 2025 of the remote meeting provisions. This October 23rd, 2023 Select Board meeting will be conducted via remote participation by the board. I hereby grant permission to Westwood Media Center to record the meeting. Is there anyone else who wishes to record the meeting? I see no affirmative responses. So with that, good evening and welcome everyone. I am Mary Ann LeBlanc Cummings. I am the chair of the Select Board, and I am here with my colleagues, Rob Gotti and Joe Previtera. Also with me on the screen tonight is Chris Coleman, our town administrator. Actually, he just disappeared for a moment. I think he's having some technical issues. He'll be with us shortly, I'm sure. Also with us is Stephanie McManus, our assistant town administrator and director of finance. Molly Keene, assistant town administrator and director of human resources. Pat Ahern, our town council. Tish Healy, executive assistant to the town administrator. We have Charlotte Lynch and Alex are here from Westwood Media Center. And we also have with us Nora Loughnane, our Director of Economic and Community Development. So welcome everyone. I will launch right into the chair's update. First, I want to remind folks that the Community and Economic Development Department and the Climate Action Task Force are sponsoring community visioning sessions for the Climate Action, Resiliency, and Sustainability Plan. The first session took place last week and it was recorded by Westwood Media Center, so you can see it on their website. It was, I watched it. It was a very exciting session. Joe, I know you were there as the select board representative to the task force. It was a very engaging session, and there will be a second one on November 2nd at the library at 6 p.m. So we really encourage folks to attend and participate, and if you're unable to watch on Westwood Media Center. Secondly, I want to remind folks that our Veterans Day ceremony will take place at Veterans Park on Saturday, November 11th. The ceremony will take place at 11 a.m. In case of inclement weather, the ceremony will be moved to the Josepha Jowdy Little Theater at the high school. And if the ceremony is to be moved, the town will send out an alert Westwood call prior to the event and post the information to the town website. If you haven't already, residents are encouraged to sign up for alert Westwood calls on the town website. The speakers at the ceremony will include the American Legion Commander Dick Pastor. That's it for my update. I will turn it over to Chris for the town administrator's report. We can't hear your audio, Chris.
Chris asked that you move to the next agenda item and we'll come back.
Okay, that's perfectly fine, Chris. We will move then to scheduled action. And our first agenda item is a public hearing for a new CV license for Ginya Castle, LLC, doing business as Blue Orchid. I will accept a motion to open the public hearing.
I move we open the public hearing for Ginya Castle LLC, DBA Blue Orchid at 927 High Street with a new common victrola license for public comment.
I'll second the motion.
Roll call, Joe?
Aye.
Rob?
Aye.
I vote aye as well. The hearing is now open and we will turn this over to our Economic and Community Development Director, Nora Loughnane. Good evening.
Thank you very much. Good evening. So the application you have here is for a new CV license for a new owner who is purchasing the Blue Orchid establishment on High Street. And I believe the attorney may be present, Russell Chin. So I'll just explain, and Russell can jump in if I miss anything. So this is the existing Blue Orchid restaurant. There are no significant changes that are being proposed. The building will still be 1,950 square feet, and they will have 48 indoor seats, which is the same as the existing facility. They'll offer a very similar menu, the Chinese American food. The requested hours of operation are Monday through Thursday from 11 a.m. to 10 p.m., Friday and Saturday from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m., and Sunday from 12 noon to 10 p.m. The manager of record is proposed. I will probably mispronounce this. I'll do my best. Zioya Chen, I'm sorry, and she is a resident of Walpole, so she is very nearby. She's been in the restaurant industry for a while, served a variety of positions. From waitress to business owner, and she's very excited to be managing this new location.
Thank you, Nora, and good evening, Attorney Chin. Would you like to be heard?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Nora, for that very, very helpful and thorough explanation of our application, as well as the introduction of the manager, Sharia Chen. Sharia actually just called my office. She was unable to log in, but I have her on the cell phone, if that's going to be workable for you folks. I don't have a lot to offer that hasn't already been provided to you, either in writing or tonight by Nora. But I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Well, thank you very much. We're thrilled to see that your client will be taking over the establishment, which has been in town for quite a while. I do not have any questions, but I'll open it up to my colleagues.
None from me.
Same here, none, Maria.
Okay. We will open this up for public comment. We'll just give this a few more seconds.
While we're waiting, if I could just add that there is a food permit that's required, and there'll be final inspections after additional leasehold improvements are made. So inspections by the fire department, health department, and building department are still pending. So if the board is willing to grant a new CV license to this organization, we ask you to make it contingent upon the food permit and all final inspections.
Thank you, Nora. And to be clear, there's no alcohol license.
There is not. This is CV only.
Well, I don't see any public comment, so I think we can move to a motion on this.
I move the select board approve a common victrola license for Virginia Castle LLC, doing business as Blue Orchid at 927 High Street, pending completion of the public safety inspections and issuance of a food permit, as Nora just mentioned. And I also move that we allow the electronic signature of the select board to be affixed to the license.
I'll second that motion.
Roll call vote. Joe?
Aye.
Rob?
Aye.
I vote aye as well. Thank you very much, Attorney Chin, and to your client. Nora, thank you very much. Welcome to Westwood.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your cooperation and help. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you. You too. Chris, do we have you back?
Madam Chairman, you need to close the public hearing. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Ahern. I will
Move
entertain
we
a motion.
close the October 23rd, 2023 Virginia Castle LLC, doing business as Blue Orchid at 927 High Street, new common victrola license public hearing.
I'll second that motion.
Roll call. Joe?
Aye.
Rob?
Aye.
I vote aye as well. All right, Chris, we can move to your town administrator's report.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I apologize for my technical difficulties.
Happens to all
or
of us.
technical shortcomings, however you'd like to identify those. Yes, to inform the board and the community, Under the right to shelter law, the town of Westwood has been informed by the Commonwealth that they will be booking 10 rooms in the Budget Inn as early as this evening, although we have not no follow-up information regarding the arrival of these individuals to the Budget Inn as of yet, providing unhoused families with shelter. According to the Commonwealth, due to the immediate shelter needs and in order to fulfill the state's obligation to provide shelter to unhoused families, families may be placed in shelter at the Budget Inn as early as today. We are still awaiting further notification. The National Guard will be arriving and the Commonwealth will follow up with information with the Guard's deployment. The emergency family shelter system has been expanded over the past year to meet the record demand of for family shelter. Only families with children and pregnant individuals can qualify for the shelter. We have communicated with our team. We have spoken with the superintendent of schools. He has communicated with his team. We are just awaiting further information from the Commonwealth. I also understand, I've only been here a short time, but I know that many residents in Westwood are very generous and very caring and very giving. We just ask that if you can just put that on pause for one moment until we're able to meet the individuals who the state will be housing here and assess their needs. And then we will certainly be communicating if there's things that would be a benefit to them that if residents were interested in donating. Just as a follow-up, the holiday giving fund that our Youth and Family Services puts on, if they know anyone who's in need for the upcoming holiday season, please contact the Youth and Family Services Division. Also, if you're interested in donating to the holiday program, please contact the Youth and Family Services Division. My last update, Madam Chair, is we have a new board member in our library division. It's our Assistant Director and Head of Technology. His name is Andy Northrup. He has 10 years of library experience in a variety of facets within library departments. He spent a large portion of his career in Eugene, Oregon, and he also has most recently worked for Cumberland Public Library in Rhode Island as their Assistant Library Director and Technology Coordinator. So we welcome Andy, his years of experience, and look forward to working with him.
Thanks very much, Chris. We will return to our scheduled action agenda, and our next item is the Canton Street project. And with us, we have Todd Korchin, our Director of the Department of Public Works. We have Brendan Ryan, the Assistant Director, and we have John Rockwell from TEC, our consultant. Good evening and welcome all of you.
Thank you for having us.
I will turn this over to you, Todd, for an update, please.
Well, again, thank you for having us tonight. For those that attended, I believe all the board members were in attendance. We had a great meeting in September at the Downey Cafeteria, and I will say out of all the meetings that I've ever attended, it was definitely the highest attendance, highest attended meeting I've ever seen. But it says a lot about the community as a whole to be able to have that willingness to want to participate, want to weigh in, and really express what they thought about the project thus far, be it that it's at a very early stage of design. And it was really just an initial presentation of what the state at that time was requiring to fund this thing fully. That said, as I promised and guaranteed at the end of that meeting, and quite frankly, at the beginning of that meeting, we were going to have a follow-up call with the state that we did have this morning. And after the state attended that meeting, I will say it says a lot about the community as a whole, because there were several compliments as to how each resident carried themselves in this meeting. And it was one of the most constructive meetings that the state has observed as well. So I think, again, testament to the community. That said, within the phone call this morning, there is a willingness to exhibit a level of flexibility pertaining to this project. If everybody can recall, initially when we presented this at the Downey Cafeteria, there was a shared use path on one side of Canton Street and a sidewalk on the other side of Canton Street. The phone call this morning that we had with the state expressed a level of willingness from the state as far as their requirements go to reduce that obligation to just a shared use path on one side of the roadway, completely eliminating the concept of having a sidewalk on one way. What they did say to us this morning, that there will be requirements, however, with this shared use path. They want to see the shared use path vary in width between 8 and 10 feet. They would obviously like to see it be 10 feet wide, but they understand there are constrictions, there are restrictions that are going to be in some locations. It was kind of our conversation that we had with them to just really push back a little bit with respect to that and try to get them to just keep it at an 8-foot wide shared use path. Along with that, they also want us to create a buffer of anywhere between 2 and 4 feet. A buffer, for lack of better words, would be a grass strip in between the roadway, the granite curbing, and then have a buffer. The 4-foot buffer would allow for trees to be planted as forms of mitigation along the corridor. A 2-foot buffer, if we reduced it, obviously wouldn't have the width to plant the trees. But again, their requirements to really clarify this, we can eliminate the sidewalk, hence picking up upwards to 9 to 12 feet of wiggle room if we redesign this project. The shared use path would mirror exactly what is down on University Ave to date. If you go down by across from actually the Amtrak station and were to walk down all the way past Wegmans, there's currently a shared use path here. What they wanted to see is a 10-foot shared use path is identical to exactly what is down on University Ave right now. It's essentially 2 concrete panels side by side. Each of them are approximately 5 feet wide. But again, we're looking to create that shared use path on a consistent 8-foot wide base heading all the way down Canton Street. But we do have to keep in mind, yes, you have an 8-foot shared use path, but they also, again, want to see at least at a minimum a 2-foot buffer, or if we wanted to create enough of a footprint to house trees, we'd have to crank that up to about 4 feet. So essentially from the edge of curb, then depending upon what we were to possibly look at for a grass strip and or buffer, you could be upwards to a 12-foot total footprint of between the shared use path, the grass strip, and the granite curb. I think obviously after they attended that meeting, they heard the desire. They heard obviously everybody get up. There was an extremely high level of opposition based on what was initially presented. They heard that loud and clear, but unfortunately their willingness to just go with a sidewalk and fund just a sidewalk is just not there. That appetite it's a 0%. The opportunity to incorporate the shared use, which I know it's been viewed as a 3rd lane. It's essentially it's a Cadillac version of a sidewalk. It's wider. There's no doubt about it. You have a typical cross section of a sidewalk would range from 5 to 5.5 feet. We're hopeful that it could be 8 feet. What the state would like to see is where we could get 10 feet, make it 10 feet, where it has to be 8 feet, make it 8 feet. But again, if this was to move forward and the town wanted to proceed with pursuing this, we're confident on our end that we will push for the 8-foot wide shared use path. I can't guarantee that it would stay 8 feet the entire way until we do our formal submission for a design exception to make it a true 8-foot shared use path if that's what the select board wanted to pursue. I guess some positives of having the wider buffer, and again, I call it grass strip just because it's not fair to have people understand what a buffer is or perceive what a buffer is. We can call it a grass strip, we can call it a buffer, but the pros of the buffer, I mean, if you could envision going down Canton Street, you would have a granite curb. If you wanted to go for a 4-foot buffer, yeah, you could go and you could plant maple trees, whatever trees you wanted to plant all the way down that buffer, all the way down Canton Street. If you wanted to keep it a 2-foot buffer, again, you're restricted with respect to what you could plant in there, or more than likely just be a grass strip. But if you go back to the 4-foot buffer, it would potentially allow for utility pole relocations to be placed within that buffer rather than the initial proposed, where some of the utility relocations happen to fall within what is perceived as people's front lawns. But that would be a benefit, I would say, if we were able to do a 4-foot buffer and giving us that opportunity. We also just have to look at the overall concept of this now, where if you're eliminating the sidewalk on one side, I mentioned earlier this evening, we're going to pick up on average 9 to 12 feet of wiggle room to really look at this cross section of Canton Street, look at the scope of the project and really see, all right, well, we have 9 to 12 feet of wiggle room here. that's a lot more play than we had by having to have, or we're obligated to have the sidewalk and the shared use path. So having that wiggle room obviously will minimize what was, a very high level of impact. I can't guarantee anything again, but we would be able to take a good look at everything and say, yeah, it would make sense potentially. We can shift things over here. We might be able to provide a crossing here or there. But again, without looking into this further, I can't really provide those answers at this point. But I will say, we have to keep in mind here, we have the slip ramp, we have Topgolf that's opening up. There's a tremendous amount of traffic that we can all probably agree on and speculate. This is an opportunity for the town to incorporate features like granite curbing, to incorporate concepts like lane, shrinking them down to 10-foot lanes. And we had some very constructive conversations this morning with the state. At every crossing, we could certainly introduce raised crossings. And they're not speed humps, but they're certainly traffic calming mechanisms. So, as we project down the road here, no pun intended, but, you have the slip ramp, we're going to have Topgolf, and there will be a calling for something to be done out there. This is an opportunity for us to take advantage of potentially, again, funding mechanism here. Yes, are we incorporating a shared use path? Yes, I think we all have to understand that. We have to be openly transparent about that. It's going to be anywhere between 8 and 10 feet. But again, if anybody wants to see it firsthand, there's currently one on University Ave right now. And I think it's just a decision that we finally have to make. I know we're all, everybody on this call, everybody listening in, there's been hundreds of emails. Most of them are in opposition. But I think we all have to finally come to a point where we decide as a community, in projecting out with potential impacts that are on the horizon, what is it that we want to do? Do we want to move forward with this? Do we want to perhaps look at a preliminary design of what this would look like from a standpoint of, levels of impact? I don't know. It's pretty much where we are. We're at a crossroads, and we'd like to finally figure out, are we going to move forward to some degree and again, get some answers here, or do we want to punt this thing? And knowing if we're going to punt it, then knowing what's on the horizon for potential traffic impacts and how we could address them and at what cost at that point. So.
Thank you, Todd. One question I have is, could you just speak a little more to the raised crossings? How many might be envisioned?
Well, I would say, Madam Chair, as you move forward with this, depending upon what route we would take, if we just took a preliminary approach again and invest some time and energy and some money into, an initial concept of this, we could certainly look at where those potential crossings could be, or potential raised intersections could be, where the crossings would be. Obviously, from a design standpoint, we want to limit the amount of crossings going down Canton Street. But we would love to incorporate, if there were 1 or 2 crossings, incorporate that raised crossing. It's not a true speed hump, but it's a clear cut delineation of where the roadway is to where it would raise, traffic calming features. You'd have crosswalk, push button RRFBs that you would install there. Those are just your typical, you press the button, crosswalk lights up, and it's go time. But I think from a standpoint of answering that definitively, we really wouldn't know unless we embarked on a preliminary level of design to say, yeah, it would make sense to put maybe 1 or 2 in, and here's where they would pretty much go because of what makes sense with levels of impact and so on and so forth.
Thank you. I want to open this up to Rob. I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, Todd, thank you. Good news and good progress with the state. I guess a couple of questions that I had while you were speaking. First was, it sounded, and I think you answered it, to mitigate some of the places where there are space constraints, you would be able to alternate the side of the street where this takes place, and there obviously you'd have your crossing. That would be one good safety measure in terms of helping calm some of the traffic and mitigate the impact to the residents from a land perspective. I guess, are there other things that are within our purview as a community? Because the reality is the traffic is coming based on the slip ramp that you talked about and Topgolf being there. irrespective of whether this shared use path goes forward, this is a safety project. And so the question that I've got is there any other relief we might be able to provide residents from the volume of traffic that is going to be going through there? Is that something that we could be looking into as well? Because I view the shared use as a safety mechanism, but there's also the coming increased volume of traffic that you're referring to. And I'm just curious, is there something that we might be able to do that's within our control to help mitigate that?
Yeah, I think what you would want to do is try to incorporate these features that make it less appealing for these bigger, larger vehicles to utilize Canton Street, be it, again, lane reductions, bringing them down to 10 feet wide, the granite curbing. And I just think overall, those raised intersections or raised crossings where those are, the more you can make it less appealing. But I always err on the side of caution that traffic calming projects always get confused with traffic elimination projects. And it's not the case. It merely slows down vehicular travel. It very rarely decreases overall volume. People are just always, they're either on Waze or on MapQuest, and they're trying to find the shortest, quickest route. But the one thing that we could do is just make it as least appealing as possible for those larger vehicles to go down there. And one would think 10-foot travel lanes, granite curbing, trees that we would look to incorporate into the project now, in the raised crossings. Myself as a former truck driver, I would be less apt to try to squeeze down a road like that, take the urban out of it.
If I could interject, for folks that are putting comments in the chat, please enter your address. It's our policy to not read questions unless folks list their address. So please do that. And also, I just wanted to raise one issue, Rob, to your point about traffic coming down Dedham Street with the slip ramp. And actually, Todd and Laura might be able to address this better. But there has already been discussion about doing a traffic count once that ramp is operational. Nora, perhaps you could speak to that.
Sure. So the town had engaged Beta Engineering to do a intersection analysis and to come up with potential redesigns for the Canton Street University Avenue intersection back in 2013. And then they started that study and came up with some preliminary designs. And then the study was put on hold to await the redesign of by the state of the intersection and of the slip ramp. And then it was discussed that we would initiate that after the reinitiate that study after the slip ramp opened, and we could attain actual counts for what the traffic might be going up University Avenue or going up Canton Street. So it sounds like we're nearing that point where the slip ramp is soon to be open, and we could reconsider engaging Beta in that study. And the first step in that study would be new traffic counts. We have the counts that were taken in 2016 by University Station Developer and reviewed by Beta. We would need new counts to show how traffic patterns have changed since the slip ramp opens.
I think we should definitely do that. Any other questions or comments from my colleagues?
I guess based on whatever the new counts come back at, as a Nora Todd question, would there be anything that could be done to, say, limit time of day or directional turns onto Canton Street or something like that, or through traffic or anything like that, that would be able to help stem the tide of the impact of this? I really think the slip ramp is going to be number one based on, Waze and Apple Maps and all the rest of Google Maps. I think that's going to have the biggest impact. So I'm just curious as to, in addition to looking at safety measures through the sidewalk project, the shared use project, what else we might be able to do.
So that would be the subject of Beta's review. They would look at something from time of day restrictions to a significant interchange or intersection redevelopment. When the University Station project was first conceived in 2012, 2013, there was a development agreement, and that required set aside of some land if the town needs to redesign the intersection and needs to have more wider right of way to do that. So that possibility exists. When they first looked at it back in 2013, 2014, the designs were extremely costly and it was not warranted for the traffic that we had then. So the idea was to suspend the study, wait until we see the slip ramp open, take another look and see if the additional traffic related to the slip ramp is great enough to justify the cost of actual physical mitigation measures. If not, then the fallback is to possible time of day, but that would have to be evaluated. So if we re-engage Beta in this analysis, that would be the first thing they do is the traffic counts, and then knowing what those numbers are, they would start reviewing and proposing different classes of changes that could be made.
Thank you, Nora.
I have a question, Todd, and maybe this is better directed to John, and welcome Mike Myers, also from TEC. Were we to embark on a preliminary design based on the feedback we've received from the state so that we could see what that would look like and consider it, what are we looking at as far as time to get that done?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think, we would recommend sort of an interim step to look at, a revised preliminary design to a point where we're able to establish, okay, what are the impacts associated with this design? What are the costs associated with this impact? And develop a revised design exception report, design justification workbook for MassDOT. And that basically is justifying the reduced shared use path width that we've talked about, that DOT has said that they would likely be supportive of. So to get to that revised preliminary design level, and a submittal of that revised design justification workbook to justify those design exceptions would be on the order of 2 to 3 months, I would think.
Mm-hmm.
I think the design process, sorry to interrupt, I think the design process of that initial development of a revised preliminary design really needs to be sort of an iterative process. As Todd mentioned, we're able to save 9 to 12 feet reduction between the prior concept that we presented at the design public hearing and what we're talking about now in conjunction with DOT. So that 9 to 12 feet savings, we may want to shift the roadway slightly to have some of that savings on one side versus the other in different segments. So we'd want to do an iterative process to look at each segment of the roadway, recognizing that in some areas, some houses are closer to the roadway, in other areas, the trees are denser, to be able to overall throughout the corridor minimize impacts overall.
And do you think you would be able, with that kind of a preliminary design, to quantify in some way what you think the impact would be as far as minimizing speeds on the road?
Yeah, I mean, DOT definitely encouraged us to look at additional traffic calming measures, recognizing what we heard, a lot of the concerns we heard at the public hearing. So as part of that evaluation, that development of that preliminary design, we would look at evaluating additional traffic calming measures. As Todd alluded to, reducing the lane width down to 10 feet will have a pretty significant benefit, we believe. Introduction of the granite curb is also a traffic calming measure. Reconstructing the existing medians there, albeit by themselves have a relatively minimal impact to speeds. But when you compile different various traffic calming measures together is when they really begin to have a more of a benefit in total. So each incremental element that you introduce has a relatively small impact, but together they have a greater impact to reduction in speeds.
Thank you. Rob and Joe, anything else before I take some?
For John, I guess. John, you said, timing on a redesign sort of 2 to 3 months. If you were taking an iterative process, does it still fit within that 2 to 3 month time frame? And then I guess for Todd, and then how does that fit with the overall sort of timing of the process with the state that you had laid out previously.
Yeah, so yeah, that 2 to 3 month timeframe does account for an iterative process to develop a revised preliminary design. Just to be clear, that's not, that 2 to 3 month timeframe isn't to develop a full 25% design resubmittal, which ultimately, we understand from the state would be required if the board decided to move forward with the alternative that we develop at the preliminary level. So there would be additional time beyond the state's approval of the exceptions in order to get to a 25% resubmittal down the line.
And then with respect to the state, we've already confirmed with them, this project still wouldn't be programmed until FY28. So this wouldn't have any impact on that time or that benchmark of timing being met. And I think, Madam Chair, you said the two words that are huge with this, and I hope the public understands this again. If we embark on a preliminary design, a preliminary relook at this and see now the options are much greater to minimize impacts, the two key words are bring it back to the select board to see, be it view, and consider. This isn't like we're moving this concept forward now. This is taking an opportunity to look at this preliminary design to say, wow, what a difference this is based on what the initial design was with respect to initial impacts, or wow, there isn't much of a difference and it still looks like it's going to be very impactful and detrimental to the aesthetic value of Canton Street and to all the views and values that each abutter has. That's what we're bringing it back for. I mean, we're this into it right now. We hosted a constructive meeting. We heard the residents loud and clear that most, if not all in opposition, wanted an accommodation of some sort. Obviously, the preference is a sidewalk, but this is our ability to show that the shared use path is very similar to a sidewalk. It's been perceived as a third lane. It is not a third lane. It would be constructed the same way as a sidewalk is constructed, used with concrete material, not asphalt. We could tint the concrete. We just want to provide the residents a final opportunity to see what we were able to get the state to adhere to on our end, on our terms, as much as we could, and have the select board view that as such, and then make that decision, see and consider, and perhaps move forward with it. But without the preliminary level at this point, we're not going to have that opportunity to see and weigh the two versus each other, see what the worst case scenario is, and now see what our ultimate best case scenario is after the conversation we have with the state.
Mm-hmm. And I think what will be important to that process, Todd, is having this be an inclusive process where we bring the residents in, and perhaps we form a working group with residents to, if the board chooses to go forward, to have a working group come in and really look at that together and discuss it, bring folks in from the community, directly impacted folks, to really have that conversation and really turn over that preliminary design, because that is what it would be, preliminary, just an opportunity to look now that we know what the state is willing to do, having heard the residents' concerns. And we appreciate all your work, Todd, on this, the whole team. But I think that will be an opportunity to bring the community in, form a working group, if we decide to go this route. I'd like to bring in some comments that we're getting and questions, which I think might help us in this conversation. So let me bring some of these in now. First, Gary Salian, 9 Adams Street. He says a shared use path is not what the residents' lawn might be want. The proposal was originally for a sidewalk. This is taking a turn way out of scope. This is changing the entire character of Canton Street. This is not solving the traffic problem. It's a third lane, not solving the traffic issue. How is the traffic going to be solved for? The lane is not what we need to solve for. has he not listed to the petition, the abutters, and the overwhelming opposition at the meeting? A lane is not going to solve for traffic reduction. This is the wrong solution for the problem. This is an opportunity to fix the intersection. Fix the intersection at University Ave and Canton Street. There is a conceptual design that the town has. It's not large vehicles. Everyone has an SUV. Trucks are not allowed on Canton Street today. And then there is a question, how much has been expended on this current design that everyone is opposing? Can someone answer that question? Pat, I see you speaking, but I can't hear you. You're muted, Pat.
I think you need to get the address of the person who wants to know how much money has been spent.
Oh, I did announce it.
Okay.
9
Right.
Adam Street.
Mea culpa.
No worries. So do we have an answer on the question of what's been spent?
Do you have that handy, or do you need me to jump in?
I do. It's approximately $350,000.
Okay. I'm going to continue on. Comment from Shelley Reaver, 549 Canton Street, regarding the speed and volume of traffic. Why can't Westwood lower the speed limit significantly in the way that Canton did? The speed limit on Dedham Street is 25 to 30 miles per hour. In addition, the pronounced police presence would lower speed and stop large trucks. Is there anyone who can address the speed limit issue?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak a little bit to that. I mean, the speed is regulated at the state level. And along Canton Street, there are 3 segments of regulated speeds between 30 miles an hour and 40 miles an hour. It's possible to petition the state to change the speed regulation, but it's quite an involved process, and it requires a pretty in-depth speed study, evaluating what the speed of current traffic is driving, what the target speed is, et cetera. So through that process, the results of that process aren't necessarily guaranteed to result in a lower speed limit along the entire stretch of the roadway.
Thank you. Couple of questions from Beth Talea, 5 White Lane. She asks, how much more money is to be spent on this additional design? Is there an estimate on that?
I think I can answer that one, John. Give you a break. We having gotten the information from Mass DOT this morning, and then wanting to meet with the select board tonight to try to get direction on the next steps. We wanted to go through that process first before providing an estimate for this new design approach. John and I got a chance to run some quick numbers, and I think this initial first step of just the preliminary design and then submitting the design justification workbook would be around the order of magnitude of right around 100,000.
Thank you. Beth also writes one comment, no, and then a question, can we get any money back from that no bid contract to TEC? And there is a comment from Maureen White, 568 Canton Street. The speed can be 30 miles per hour because it is a thickly settled area, per someone I spoke to from the town. Okay, I think I captured all the comments we've gotten thus far. So I want to open this up to my colleagues on the notion of going forward with a revised preliminary design along the lines of what Todd has outlined, with the idea that during the time that that's being conducted, that work is being done, we put together a working group which would be, I think the idea would be we would have that working group together so that once we get that design, we can get the working group together to work on it. And then obviously there would be a larger process depending on the results of that working group to involve the larger community. But what are your thoughts on that?
Mary Ann, quick question. Where is my hand showing up tonight? Chris, you know, in audio visual work, so.
I'm sorry, Joe, I did not see it.
I know at one time it was showing up on a window.
Hand.
You've got a dark hand
It's
in the
in your
upper
window.
It's in your upper left window there.
Oh, Marone.
Go ahead, Joe. I'm sorry.
It's against the wall. Let me take that down first. Well, first I wanted to say thanks to Todd and to Chris. This is amazing work. I'm very pleased. I still have a reluctance towards a 10-foot path across being added to this stretch, but I also appreciate the traffic issues as well. What isn't clear to me is, do we need to submit the plans with a 10-foot multi-use path and then ask for the waiver before we, if I don't want to spend $100,000 and then have the state say, no, it has to be 10 feet. I'd sure like to get a little more assurance on that. So that's one question I have. The second question I have is, Chris, you and I spoke about it today. Are the bollards on this? Are bollards incorporated into this design? And lastly, Marion, I think the working group is a great idea. But again, I just want to reiterate, I still have some reluctance to the 10-foot path.
Joe, I'll say before John answers that quick, so do I. Believe me, I mean, I have reluctance to 10 foot. It was the first thing I said to the state this morning, is that it won't be received well. It's not going to be received because, quite frankly, the vibe that we heard in that room that night was a sidewalk. And like I mentioned earlier, sidewalk 5.5, I mean, really 5.5 feet, 8 feet by some might be palatable. I might be wrong. Maybe it's not after we look at this preliminary design, but 10 feet will be spit out in 2 seconds. We're wasting our time, but we have to design this thing incorporating an 8-foot consistent notion and have the state chew on it. John, I sorry to jump on it too quick, but
no, that's fine. I think, you know, it's sometimes it's a challenge to characterize MassDOT's position. In this case, my interpretation of their statements through the conversations that we've had are that they're willing to accept an 8-foot path. They would like to see, of course, they would like to see something wider wherever it's feasible. And in their minds, my interpretation of their position in this case is that they would like to see 10 feet in cases where the additional 2 feet would not result in additional impacts to trees, to stone walls, to right-of-way. And in some cases that can be, you know, subjective as to what's considered impactful, right? Some of the abutters that we heard from, 2 feet closer to their house is impactful to them, regardless of whether it impacts an additional tree. So that being said, I think my approach as you know, the design manager would be to propose a consistent 8-foot path, recognizing that what we heard from abutters is that is the least impactful solution. DOT would then review that, and we may hear some feedback from them if they identify specific areas where they see an opportunity to increase it to 8 feet. I mean, from 8 to 10 in certain segments. And we would have to counter that with rationale as to why we recommend remaining at 8 feet consistently.
Thank you.
I think also, I'm sorry, Joe, Chris brought up bollards, in fact, earlier in a previous conversation. So I think what you're looking to achieve is like a clear delineation between where the shared use path is at intersections to make it not look like it's flowing somehow, some way into the roadway. Is that like distinctively the shared use path? Is that what you're trying to do with the bollards as far as
sort of like
vehicular?
the Cape Cod bike trail.
Yeah, I think
you have to stop before you enter the street.
I think that's where landscape design, landscape architecture would come into play, depending upon what we're looking at for buffers. If you're going with a 4-foot buffer, I think just if you try to envision Canton Street as a whole. If it was just going down the roadway with a 4-foot buffer, would be our goal and intention. I mean, with a tree, from tree mitigation standpoint, to incorporate as many trees going down the roadway as you could, and perhaps use that or any landscape features rather than a bollard. I don't know that you would have to do a bollard once you saw how this was going to lay out and how the trees would flow into it from a landscape aesthetic view and all of the above. I think the landscaping would do enough justice to really delineate where your shared use path is from edge of pavement.
It's not a crazy idea though, Todd, to explore, just because, you know, if you're talking about especially cyclists more than pedestrians needing to almost dismount and walk across, or, you know, at least significantly slow down to fit through or something like that, because that will be you know, a danger with the volume of traffic that we're talking about. Marianne, with respect to your question, you know, on this and moving it forward, I think, you know, we owe it to ourselves to explore what this could look like, right? Because I think while there is opposition, I also heard from many of those opposed to the project as presented a desire for some type of safety path, I'll call it, right? Whether it's a sidewalk or this shared use, because the volume of traffic is coming. And that's why I'm asking almost separately and apart, what things can we do from a traffic mitigation standpoint? But this to me is a safety thing. And so I think, you know, the state has listened. It sounds like from, you know, Todd and John, that there are opportunities for us to be able to address it. I guess one of my questions for the two of you is with respect to, so we submit this waiver, what then is the approval process for that from securing the funding that we're talking about? Because I guess that where are there risks in that process?
Yeah, so we would revise the preliminary design, or prepare a revised preliminary design, prepare that updated design justification workbook, submit that to DOT. That's reviewed by both their district office as well as their complete streets engineer. Given what we've heard through, you know, since the design public hearing from DOT, I think in general, what we're considering proposing would be likely to be approved by those two offices. Ultimately, an exception from the state's healthy transportation policy must go to the secretary level, though, for approval. The risk there is that it's perceived that 8-foot path with a relatively narrow buffer, relatively narrow lanes may be unsafe, and there's a slight risk that it's rejected at that level, and they ask us to go back to the drawing board for some reason. I think the secretary's level takes the recommendations of their district level staff and complete streets engineer, weighs that pretty highly when making their determination. I can't say there's no risk, but I think it's relatively low risk given the process we've been to date.
And it's been an extensive process. And I think if we just look at things as a whole right now, we left that meeting, we heard everybody loud and clear. A large amount of the opposition, as mentioned, Rob, you just mentioned it, we're in favor of a sidewalk. Ultimately, it's the town's decision. It's not my decision, John, Mike's, Brendan's. It's the town's decision, and it's a 3-foot decision. It's the same material of what a sidewalk would be. It's 3 feet wider. If it made those 3 or cleared those 3 benchmarks and got approved, it would be funded at the state and federal level over 3 feet. We know definitively 3 feet less, we pay for it, or we don't ever get it. So, you know, again, like, let's look at the preliminary concept and what it might look like, and then figure out, is it worth 3 feet? Are the impacts that far less? I would speculate they will be, but again, we don't know yet. But it's a 3-foot decision, ultimately, if it clears those 3 hurdles.
Yep, I understand. So I would support going to the next step from a redesign standpoint, Marianne. And to your question, I also would support the idea of forming some type of task force or working group.
Great. I do have a few more comments from residents I just want to read before we get to the next step here. Additional comment from Gary Usalian, 9 Adams Street. This is wrong that residents want an 8-foot path. The statement was that we are not opposed to a sidewalk. Again, this is just appeasing the DOT and not addressing reducing traffic. Shelley Reaver, I did read her address earlier. You did not hear from the residents that we want a shared use path. The statement is untrue. The comments from Jonathan Rockwell about the speed limit are enlightening. The town should put the town and money into pursuing the speed limit issue as opposed to the reconstruction process. If Canton can pursue this, we should as well. The abutters are overwhelmingly opposed to a shared use path, and we have articulated this to Todd, the select board, and Chris Coleman. We will continue to oppose this, and this will not lead to repairing our relationship with town officials. Maureen White asked an additional question. I missed it earlier. She wanted me to ask you, Nora, how many vehicles traveled Canton Street in 2013 per beta? I don't know if you have that information available.
I don't have that at my fingertips. I believe that traffic counts were actually conducted in 2014, not in 2013. So we signed a contract in 2013. Beta conducted traffic reports in 2014, 2015, and 2016. That's my recollection. And there was a Canton Everett Forbes traffic calming meeting in the fall of 2016. I'm pretty sure it was in November. And there was a report that was given there. And I remember that it broke down sections of Canton Street, Everett Street, and Forbes Street and gave the counts prior to University Station opening. And then after University Station was open and traffic calming was in place, and it compared them. And I can get those numbers. I remember the Beta had a presentation at that traffic calming meeting. So I will find that presentation. I can post it to the website so everyone can take a look at it. I do recall that all of the segments, the volume of traffic and the speed of traffic decreased, except for a section of University south of Hedgerow, I believe it was. There was a slight increase of a handful of cars, but most of them, the volume and the speed both decreased. So I will find that report and I will post it to the web page so anyone can take a look at it. And if anyone has any specific calls, they're welcome to call me in the office tomorrow.
Thank you, Nora. And one other comment, Steve Rafsky, 646 Canton Street. He writes, I'm happy to hear the state is willing to work with us. That being said, there is a long history that needs to be considered. There has been discussion of a sidewalk on Canton Street for approximately 20 years that I am aware of. There has also been discussion and planning regarding one, traffic mitigation sidewalks and non-vehicular traffic opportunities within the Canton Street corridor as the town was planning and permitting the University Avenue redevelopment project, and two, mitigating the traffic impacts if and when the I-95 northbound exit onto Dedham Street would be opened. Before doing more design, I encourage the select board to form a committee comprised of a select board member, 1 or 2 planning board members, non-board member residents, and appropriate town employees to look at a comprehensive solution that enhances the goals of a neighbor traffic pattern and enhances the character of the neighborhood. Thanks, Steve Rapsky. Okay. Well, actually one more question, and then I think we can move this. Elisa Shapiro, 55 Lions Drive. Why does the state require a shared use path versus a sidewalk? Why is it a non-starter? John, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, their design directives and guidelines are really in support of their Healthy Transportation Policy Directive, which was implemented back in early 2000s, mid 2010 timeframe.
Thank you.
Which require both bike and ped accommodations on roadways with segments that have speeds of the same as this road and volumes of traffic similar to Canton Street.
So I think just to recap, we have talked about the traffic issue generally as it's impacted or going to be impacted by the new ramp. And we've talked about the traffic count to be done in that regard with respect to that issue. We have before us a proposal for a revised preliminary design, which is a significant change from what had been proposed. And the idea is that we're discussing is to get that done, to take a look at it, and then bring it to a working group that we will bring together. We've had some excellent suggestions tonight on that, but to certainly include residents to make that a collaborative process, much like we've done on many other projects in Westwood, to then consider and make some recommendations and suggestions with respect to it. This needs to be a community-wide discussion. So I think what we are looking at is a motion perhaps to go forward with conducting the revised preliminary design and to set up a working group in the interim to review that once that is completed.
Just point of procedure, Madam Chair. Do
Yes.
we need a formal proposal in writing that's a little more definitive than what was, the estimate that John and sorry, I'm losing the other gentleman's name, gave earlier? Or are you looking for a motion? Because are we making a motion on the $100,000 that was put forward by Beta, or are we, do we need something more formal than that?
Well, the funds have already, and Pat, I'll look to you, but the funds have already been allocated by the town for design. So this would be, pardon me?
They have, and I believe it was reported earlier that there's $650,000 remaining in those funds.
Right.
Is that right, Todd?
Yeah, Pat, I'd like to get a full, up to date speed. I gave an approximate of what was spent thus far, but we definitely have more than enough balance left.
So you could have a motion not to exceed motion. You could move to redesign for a shared use path at a cost not to exceed whatever number you want to plug in.
All right. Well, I'll look to the team here for guidance on that.
Makes sense to me.
I'll do that. All right. So I move that the select board authorize a redesign based on the conversations that have taken place here tonight with a cost not to exceed $100,000.
I'll second the motion.
Roll call. Joe?
Aye.
Rob?
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. But just want to point out that what's important to this is the notion that we'll be putting together a working group that is then going to review this and make recommendations. There is one last comment that I will read on this from Fran Fusco, 20 Pine Lane, who writes, "This project sounds like a done deal, regardless of what the residents want. How conveniently the need justification pivots when there's massive opposition." I would simply say that this is not a done deal. This is something that we are looking at very carefully, as we have discussed, and we're going to have a working group with residents to look at this so that we as a town decide what it is that we want. So looking forward to that process, and I want to thank everybody for this conversation and for the continued work on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, so I think we can move on to our next agenda item, scheduled action, which is with respect to the Westwood Land Trust and Prout Farm. And there's some legal history to this. Pat, would it make sense if you could give us just the legal background here? So we
I will do my best. In 1999, 2000, the McFarlands purchased Prout Farm, and they deeded it to the land trust. The land trust then, about a year later, deeded a gift of that land to the town of Westwood. The town of Westwood owns it. Looking at the tax documents, in anticipation of this meeting, it appears that the land is actually held in the care, custody, control of the Conservation Commission, based on the fact that there is a fairly extensive conservation restriction on the property. So anything that happened would need, depending on what you want to do, would need at least the blessing of the Conservation Commission, and probably, if it's any kind of long-term commitment to use of the land, would need a town meeting vote and an RFP to do what you're basically talking about. On the short term, I'm wondering, I haven't had a chance to research this, if a vote of the Conservation Commission and approval of the land trust would be sufficient to try the farming of that property out on a short-term basis. Would also require an RFP even on a short-term basis, in my opinion, because it's use of town resources.
Thank you, Pat. Let me first introduce everyone we have on the screen here. I see that we have Chuck Bean with us from the Bean Farm. We have Nancy Dempsey and Karen Manor-Metzold from the Westwood Land Trust. We have Susan Murray, who is the director of the Southeastern Mass Agricultural Partnership, and Shannon Hickey, the program coordinator for the Agricultural Partnership. We have John Cronin with us, and I think that's it on this issue. Chris, did you want to say any words to start us off?
Thanks, Mary Ann. Hi. First of all, thank you so much for having us. We greatly appreciate everybody's time and attention to this matter. It's extremely near and dear to our hearts to hopefully find some amicable conclusion to this issue. And thank you, Nancy and Karen, for joining us tonight and hearing us out and the such. I'd love to share a couple of minutes of prepared comments, if I may, and I promise won't be more than a couple of minutes, and then hand it over to John Cronin, who's been a dear friend and advocate for the farm and been facilitating a lot of the conversations we're having, and also have Susan Murray speak on our behalf related to the merits of conservation and agriculture working in harmony together. So if I may jump right in, Mary Ann, is that okay?
Please, go right ahead.
So I'm Chuck Bean, resident of 700 Clapboardtree Street. My son Christopher is right here by my side, is the farmer. He resides right next door to us at 682 Clapboardtree. He's a 27-year-old, building his business and farming, the sole proprietor of the farm, called the Bean Farm at 711 Clapboardtree. We're actually here tonight to ask the Select Board and the Westwood Land Trust to please work together to help us save our family's farm on Clapboardtree Street. In order for Chris to continue farming and operating the business, he desperately needs additional acreage to grow fruits and vegetables to sustain the business. And right adjacent to our property is an 8-acre parcel of contiguous land that's part of a larger 20-some-odd acre total parcel that's the perfect solution. And I want to give you just a little backdrop of history to our family first. Chris is actually the 14th generation of farmer in our family. It actually dates back to 1652 when John Bean came over from Scotland. He was a founding father in the town of Exeter, New Hampshire, built a sawmill on the river and farmed the land. And 12 generations of farming, and 300 years later in the 1950s, my dad, Charlie Bean, who many of you may remember, who passed away in 2010, he branched off from his family's farm in Dover and started farming the land here on Clapboardtree Street. He eventually acquired it from the Russells in 1971. So when my three brothers and I were growing up on the farm, there was ample access to lots of fields around town. We used to grow tomatoes over the Westwood, right in the field in front of the Westwood Lodge. We grew corn on the open field on Gay Street. We used to hay the fields over off of Summer Street. There's plenty of access to undeveloped land. Today, there's just not. There's a massive scarcity. I'm the oldest of four sons. My 83-year-old healthy mom and us continue to own the farmland on Clapboardtree through a trust. There's 13 grandkids. Chris is the oldest of that group. And he spent most of his formative childhood years in the lap of my father in his John Deere tractor, where he really learned the trade and developed a passion for farming. Chris went on to Severian Brothers High School, then attended Cornell University, and graduated in 2018, just 5 years ago, from the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. And he focused on agriculture, crop production and management. He's the only grandchild of 13 who's committed to keeping the family tradition alive. But in order for him to do so, he's in dire need of additional farmland in order to build a sustainable business that not only can support himself, but operate the farm to sufficiently produce enough vegetables for the Westwood community. Chris also has plans to build a beautiful new post and beam farm stand that we strongly feel will be a beacon in town and revered by many. Farmland, as I mentioned, is an amazing scarcity. I think we are the last remaining farm here in town, including most of the surrounding towns. We have only about 15 acres of land, but only about 2/3 of it is farmable. The rest of it is a little filled with woodlands or rocky ledge, or it's too wet. And having access to that 8-acre field called Clapboardtree Meadows, formerly known as Prout Farm, would just solve all the problems that my son has and provide him with enough land to sustain the farm going forward. We've crunched all the numbers. We've looked at a variety of other parcels of land outside of Westwood that could potentially be farmed, contact to the Norfolk Aggie. Nothing is feasible. Nothing works in order to keep the main hub of the farm here in Westwood. So I've been personally subsidizing the farm for the last few years, and the numbers just don't work without additional acreage. We're working with an accountant who's a recently retired partner from PwC. He's helped us look at the square footage of the land that we have. What can we ultimately grow? How can we crunch in more volume and yield out of the acreage that we have? And we keep running up against roadblocks. He needs more land. The land in question is owned by the town of Westwood, but the conservation restriction, the CR, is governed by the Westwood Land Trust. And the CR clearly depicts that agricultural activities are permitted use. It's right on page 4, section B, paragraph 9C. The land's contiguous to our farm. It's a flat field. Christopher knows it extremely well, whereas he's been actually mowing it for the town, along with my brother Tom over the years. And the soil is almost perfect for native crop production. So Chris has enjoyed a tremendous outpouring of support from the local community while he's been revitalizing the farm since my dad passed away. And he now dedicates 100% of his time to farming. The Westwood Land Trust, Karen and Nancy, we fully respect and appreciate everything you folks have done for the town of Westwood over the years. We have tremendous open space. You've been awesome stewards of that space, and we can't thank you enough. We just want you to please work with us and allow one of the permissible activities to take place. Last November, and I know you voted it down, you preferred to continue it as a meadow, and I appreciate that there are not a lot of meadow fields in Westwood, but there's only one farm, and we are on the verge of extinction if we can't work together to make this happen. So just in summary, if Chris cannot farm Clapboardtree Meadows, his plan is to stop farming the land here in Westwood, move to a different location well outside of town, and our family's then faced having to sell the property or develop the land, which we don't want. My brothers, my mother and I were all on the same page that as long as Christopher can sustain himself, have a viable business, we're going to continue allowing him to farm this land and not have any other options. So anyway, with that said, my heart's on my sleeve. I've had many discussions with Karen over the years, and we're at a breaking point. We're at a crossing the road, and we need your help. So with that said, my son Chris is here for questions, but I'd love John Cronin to share his thoughts. He's been a tremendous advocate of the farm, and We graduated together in the class of '85. We've served on a number of boards here in town. And John, I'll let you take it away.
Good evening, everybody. It's great to see a lot of familiar faces throughout the years. As Chuck mentioned, I'm a 1985 Westwood High graduate. Like Chuck, I'm a lifelong resident of Westwood. And 5 years ago, I moved to 651 Clapboardtree Street. So if you can conceptualize that you have the Bean Farm, and as you work your way towards Westwood, away from Severn, you have the Prout Farm, and I'm at the corner. And so, and Chuck and I are extremely tight. Our families are very tight. And since we've been now neighbors, we spent an awful lot of time together. I've known Christopher since he was born. So when he got out of Cornell and he started talking about trying to resurrect the farm, at that point, it was really more of a hobby than anything else, not necessarily something that he was not necessarily sure he was going to go that direction. When I moved in, I had a bunch of discussions with the Beans and specifically what was going to be the future of the Bean Farm now that I was in a butter. And something that was clear was that, without the ability to farm, they were going to have to either develop the land or sell the land. It's no secret that Westwood has Severn in the backyard of the Bean Farm. They're constantly doing work. They're obviously engaged currently with the town of Westwood, with the parking lot on the other side of Clapboardtree. So we're at a point where Severn would take that land in 10 seconds. As you guys just heard about the traffic situation on Canton Street, the traffic situation on Clapboardtree Street is not great. So one of the scenarios for me was that there's very few landmarks left in Westwood. As a lifelong resident and someone who grew up at the Bean Farm and spent a lot of time at the Bean Farm is a landmark. Additionally, as Chuck mentioned, I'm also a massive fan of the Westwood Land Trust. And early 2000s, I gave a significant donation to the Westwood Land Trust. Chuck not mentioned there was a situation that was developing with the Prout Farm that was being sold, and the Westwood Land Trust and the Beans came together and stopped a massive development from a potential 40B development that was going to go on the Prout Farm. So there's a tremendous history between the Westwood Land Trust and the Beans on Clapboardtree Street. I am someone who, again, I recognize the incredible importance of the Westwood Land Trust and put my money where my mouth was when I put a significant donation to the Westwood Land Trust. You fast forward today, Chuck has been a bit discouraged about how things are progressing. I'm not sure, he did mention it, that he has been carrying this, but he cannot continue to carry this much longer. And Christopher needs to have a viable ability to farm the land, or he's going to have to find another line of work. So at that point, I said to Chuck, it probably makes sense to have a new voice, a new set of ears, a new voice, maybe help this process along. I've dealt with Nancy a bunch in the past. I've met Karen, and I've had some dealings with the Westwood Land Trust in the past. I reached out to Karen and Nancy. We had a great chat talking about the farm, and Karen grew up on a farm. Nancy grew up on a farm. Karen grew up in a farming area. They certainly understand what the Beans are up against, but as trustees of that property, they totally understand that they are required to maintain the preservation of the premises of the natural and open condition, preserves the historical rural character of the area. That is in the conservation restriction. As Chuck mentioned, agriculture is an approved use of that land. So the bottom line is we're trying to figure out a way that we can thread the needle that preserves that acreage, that 8 acres that's able to be farmed in such a way that falls within the covenant of the conservation restriction, but at the same time, recognizing that Christopher can make a living, because losing the Bean Farm would be a travesty for all. Again, I know that the Westwood Land Trust totally recognizes that. And so one of the things that they tasked me and the Beans with was to figure out a way, is there a way to farm that land in such a way that preserves that acreage, that tract of land that would fall within the grounds of the covenant as it states about maintaining that land and that present conservation space. So as a result, we were able to get in contact with Susan and Shannon, who are both on, and they are here to answer any and all questions as it relates to how we can maintain that land and maintain the Bean Farm, and also abide by the wishes of the Westwood Land Trust as it relates to the conservation restriction and the preservation of that land. So I'm an advocate for, bottom line, what is best for the town of Westwood. The John Cronin award is named after my father for dedicated service to the town. There's a few on this call that have received it, and I'm sure there's others who will receive that award. And I think in the best interest of what's best for the town of Westwood going forward is that the bean farm needs to be in a position to thrive. And if it can't thrive, losing it would be something that I think all of us would have great regret on. Now, again, the Westwood Land Trust has been spectacular in listening to us. They understand that what we're up against. And I truly believe, as Chuck believes, that we're in a position that we can come to an agreement that allows for the beans to move forward in the Westwood Land Trust to be pleased with that conservation of the land. So with that, I turn it back to you, I guess, Mary Ann, and then perhaps maybe or Nancy or Karen, and then perhaps we can incorporate Susan and or Shannon to get their thoughts about how best to move forward. Thank you all for your time, and it's great to see everybody.
Thank you, John. Mary Ann, would you mind if Susan made a couple of comments? Is that okay?
Of course.
Yeah, Mary Ann, if I think it would be really helpful, since we're talking about the farm side of things, and then when it gets to Karen, I mean, we can talk briefly about the land trust and the CR itself, but we would really welcome hearing from Shannon and Susan about how they see the farming in that area, how they see threading the needle. I like the way John put that.
I think that would be great. So again, welcome Susan and Shannon. We'll turn it over to you.
Hi, and thanks for having us tonight. I had a great conversation with Karen the other day talking about potential land uses for this land. I'm happy to answer any questions. I don't want to take up too much of your time. What I do want to stress is that farming right now is incredibly tough. There's very tight margins. The cost of labor and the cost of inputs are so high that it's really squeezing our farmers out. So the issue of having enough land is a very serious issue. A lot of our farmers have to scale up to be able to make ends meet. So we are seeing this a lot with a lot of farmers searching for land and spending. We have one farmer that searched for 10 years for the right sized farm and enough land and is still searching. So that is definitely a problem we're seeing throughout southeastern Massachusetts. And it's a significant issue as more and more land is developed. I also want to point out that this land was classified as prime farmland, which it's stated in the CR. And that's one of the reasons why, or it's a good reason why to conserve it, is prime farmland. And the NRCS, which is the National Conservation Resource Agency, which is part of the USDA, they point out in one of their publications that according to them, prime farmland is of major importance in meeting the nation's short and long range needs for food and fiber. Because the supply of high quality farmland is limited, the U.S. Department of Agriculture recognizes that responsible levels of government, as well as individuals, should encourage and facilitate the wise use of our nation's prime farmland. And I like to echo that not all farmland is good farmland, and that it is important to preserve the prime farmland that we have and to put it into use so that we can help feed our community. As one of the last farms left, the last farm left in Westwood, it would be hard to see that go, and to have that land either lay fallow or be developed would be heartbreaking to lose even more prime farmland. And then another point is that there are ways that farming can work really well with conservation of land. When done correctly, farming actually improves the health of the soil. And there's definitely management techniques that can be implemented, like using cover crops, using crop rotation, where there are times when some of the space is actually left in cover crops for a full year to help build soil health. So there are ways that farming can actually make the land better than before. And most farmers these days are actually very conscientious about that. You can't grow good crops unless you feed your soil and take care of your soils. So that's very important, is the fact that farming can improve this land. And finally, CMAP, so the Southeastern Mass Agricultural Partnership, we are the buy local organization for Norfolk, Bristol, and Plymouth counties. And we are here to help farmers and to help farmers build thriving farm businesses. So Shannon has already been working with Chris and helping him with different aspects of his business. We offer business assistance, so we'll help write grants. We'll help connect farmers with other farmers to get advice. So Shannon's been helping connect Chris with some no-till farmers, which is a type of farming that, again, really feeds the soil and makes the land better. And so she's been connecting him with more established farmers that are already doing these methods to help him start some of these methods on the bean farm. So we're really here as a support organization to help him build his business. So both on the business side with grant writing, and we can do all sorts of financial assistance in the sense of like business plan writing, and if he needs help learning how to book it, like anything like that, we help with our one-on-one technical assistance. And then we also help connect with farm advisors that can help him with implementing different methods in farming. So we're a support organization that will help him succeed.
Thank you. Shannon, did you have anything to add?
Just that I have worked with Chris for over a year at this point, and not only does Chris really want to take care of the land that he farms and be a great steward for his historic farmland, but he also wants to involve the community in his operation and create a real community space. He's mentioned, installing trails on this additional piece of farmland so folks can come out and actually engage with agriculture and the food system. We are working on getting him certified to accept SNAP food stamps at his farm stand, and he's implementing a pick your own operation in the coming years. So he's really set on his business being a space for a community to gather. And I think that's, a less empirical aspect of agriculture that can be really beneficial to the community. And I did just want to add that regardless of how this goes, we are committed to continuing to help Chris improve his farming methods and connecting him with NRCS, and NOFA, the Northeast Organic Farming Association, and some of our other connections who can help Chris really steward the land in the best way possible. So yes, we are funded by the Massachusetts Department of Agriculture, and we're always, going to be here and helping out Chris. So just wanted to make that point. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So just to recap, and thank you all who have spoken this far. Clearly the bean farm is a landmark in Westwood. It is very important to our ecosystem, to our open space in Westwood. It is our last remaining farm, and there is a huge risk that we are going to lose that open space, lose this very important landmark in town, which provides us with local vegetation and food and social gathering. So it's town-owned land. The land trust is responsible for governing that. So I guess the question is that I have is how can we get this so that it can be used for farming? And I'll turn it over to Karen and Nancy. Oh, you're on mute.
For a while. Thanks for the reminder. I'm Karen Manor-Metzold, President of Westwood Land Trust. Nancy Dempsey, Vice President of Westwood Land Trust, is also on this call. I'd like to emphasize that we are two of 8 board members. I know that we've interacted with several of you over the years, and that we are a board of 8. The other members on the board are Steve Hart, Andy Walker, Steve Olenoff, Abby Homiller, Trevor Lobenstein, and Grace Weller. Among these folks, we have backgrounds in forestry management. We have an environmental engineer. We have someone with environmental science experience. We have an architect, a builder, someone with legal expertise and financial expertise. So we're all Westwood residents, and it is a nonprofit organization. And our mission is to preserve land and habitat in Westwood. Since we were founded in 1999, we protect over 220 acres in town. That's a total of 220 acres protected through conservation restrictions. Of these 12, 3 of the properties are owned by the town. But Westwood Land Trust is the steward and the protector of these properties. Specifically with respect to Clapboardtree Meadow, as Pat Ahern mentioned, that this property was purchased by the McFarlands in 2000 and generously donated to the town, and the conservation restriction with its requirements were granted to Westwood Land Trust as and became the holder of the conservation restriction. This property has 29 acres on it, 6 of which are the private residents next door, and 23 acres. That's a mixture of woodland, the stream that goes through it, and then the approximately 8 to 10 acre parcel that's known as Clapboardtree Meadow now. What I'd like to point out about this property that's really key to the property also is that it's contiguous to another town-owned parcel protected by Westwood Land Trust that's behind it. The address is 794 Clapboardtree Street. It's a narrow strip of land to the west of the ARC, but the biggest portion of the property is behind 665 Clapboardtree Meadow. That's also another 23 acres. So there's contiguous property with a lot of woodland and open and the open meadow. So that's something that's one of the reasons it was quite easy to protect from the state perspective too, and to approve it because of those properties of contiguous land. The land trust has been approached a number of times over the years now, recent years, to consider farming on the 8 to 10 acre meadow. Westwood Land Trust's role as steward and holder of the conservation restriction is to determine the highest and best use of the property for conservation purposes. With that in mind, we have hired a consultant to perform a comprehensive natural resource assessment on the meadow, on the open portion of the land. This will provide us with an objective view as to what plants and habitat utilize, what plants and animals utilize this space, which is really important for us as the land trust to determine the best and highest conservation use of the property. Nancy Dempsey I've been on the land trust for 20 years, Nancy even longer than me, and Nancy, with her background, I want her to speak to the conservation restriction, please, and she's very helpful on that.
Okay, first, I think just to finish up, I want to thank everyone who's presented. This is a very compelling situation, and the land trust is not in any way unsympathetic. We're just trying to do our job, which I think, John, I appreciate what you said. We're just trying to do our job of being the stewards of the conservation restriction on the property. And I don't know if Karen mentioned that we should have the report back by mid-November. We understand time is of the essence on this. We just need to make sure that the conversion of the current use from a meadow to farming would be consistent with supporting the conservation purposes of that CR. And so, I just wanted to emphasize that. I think, I'm not sure everyone here understands, or maybe people in the audience understand what a conservation easement is, but it's a It's a deed that gets recorded with the land. It lasts forever, and it's a very, very powerful document. And it's important because the organization entrusted with monitoring and enforcing the CR has just one mission in mind, and that's how do you protect the conservation values of this land, and how do you protect them forever? And so that's really what our role is. And yes, agricultural use is a permitted use with the consent of all the parties. But there are also other conservation values recited in the CR. When it was brought in as conservation land, it was brought in as an open meadow. We don't have a ton of open meadows in Westwood, and that's why, just to acknowledge that there's a value to preserving land in its state, in its wild state. And yes, we totally agree there's a value in allowing farming and good farming on the property. But there are, just to acknowledge that there are values to both. And the reason people know when they're home, when they get to Westwood, how do you know you're home? You know you're home in Westwood because you're probably driving along Clapboardtree Street or Grove Street or Summer Street, and you're driving along and you see house, and then all of a sudden there's a break and you see some open space and trees. And most of those places where you see a break are places that have been permanently protected by the land trust over the years. So protecting viewscapes and open space is very, very valuable. And I think that's all. I mean, I'd open it up to questions. That's all I have to add.
Thank you so much.
I'm sorry, Mary, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Nancy and Karen, you mentioned a year ago that you were going to hire this consultant to determine the best, highest use for the conservation values of the land. And here we are a year later. And I can't stress enough that time is of the essence. We've been trying to talk and work with you folks for over 6 years, close to 6 years now. My son is at a crossroads. Farming will preserve our land, the 15 to 16 acres of farmland adjacent to your conserved parcel. That'll also be preserved if he can farm Clapboardtree Meadows. If he can't farm Clapboardtree Meadows, he's stuck. He's in a rut. He's in a place where he cannot continue with his livelihood and have enough land to yield enough crops to maintain and sustain his business. So I hear you, I understand you, but it's the same stuff we've been hearing for years. And I feel like you're just stalling, and the answer is going to be no yet again. I'd love to know why. What is the problem with farming? It's clearly depicted right here in the CR. It spells out everything that can be done within your fiduciary responsibilities. So why such a hang up on farming?
We don't want to turn this into a debate, Chuck. I don't think it's productive. And so I would ask Karen on what has taken the delay in terms of getting an assessment done of the property. I'm not sure why it's taking as long as it is, but we're not hung up on farming, and I don't want this to turn into an adversarial situation. We all have very deep ties to this town. We've all worked very hard for this town. We all want what's best for this town. So I think you need to, I know it's really hard to wait, but literally we should have the results in mid-November, and we need to make a decision based on the facts.
Let me open this up to my colleagues. Rob, I see that you have your hand up.
Thank you, Marianne. And, Nancy, I agree that as I look at the faces on this panel, right, that are all participating, these are all folks who have given enormous amounts of time, energy, money, talent to giving back to the community. So, and I love the idea that, Chris, you are carrying on your grandfather's tradition. Every parent wants their kid to succeed, and it's got to be doubly so for your folks watching you and your grandmother watching you can't carry on your grandfather's tradition. And I understand your need. I guess what I'm trying to understand from having read the conservation restriction, knowing that farming is allowed, is I don't see where the incentives are divergent. I actually see the incentives are aligned, right? We've got, a CR that protects the land, that allows for agricultural use. We've got, a long-standing resident in the community carrying on his grandfather's tradition. And this could be a dual win for the entire community because it puts it to a productive allowed use from the perspective of the CR. So can you guys just help me understand where the sort of objectives diverge?
I can speak to that. There's just definitely getting limited farmland, but there's also getting limited grassland. So that's the part that, like today, we definitely heard from a lot of farmers and people who support farming. There are as many advocates for the grasslands and for preserving those areas. And many times the areas that get developed the quickest, most easy to develop, are those areas that are already flat and open grasslands, like on on Summer Street recently, that open meadow is what was parceled. We tried to save that didn't happen. And 2 homes went up on that area. And we do have to think about while the beans are, and this isn't our role as the land trust, but our understanding is, and I think Pat did speak to it, that it would be an RFP process to this. So, and the land trust has been approached at least once over the past several years by other people asking if we had farmland that was available, and we have said no. Again, it's not my land, but they had first made an inquiry to the land trust. So yes, we definitely feel Chris has excellent farming credentials. They're great people to work with. But that would be the next step for the town, is who would actually be farming this land. An RFP would go out. And also my understanding, Pat, is if it was determined that we approve farming, then the town would also, the land trust, as the steward of the land, we'd have to help shape what that the requirements of the farming would be.
I think we had that discussion, and in the
Yes.
interest of full disclosure, Chris Coleman and myself met with Nancy Dempsey and Karen Manor-Metzel, and I think it would be vital to have the land trust input on the RFP to make sure we're all on the same page moving forward. So yeah, that's a procedural issue that we can cross that bridge hopefully when we come to it.
Karen, may I ask a follow-up question with respect to the environmental consultant? I understand the objective of highest best use. As Chuck has so eloquently stated, the family is willing to preserve the value of the land for, these multiple generations here. And I guess as I think about, it's not all that dissimilar to what Hale is doing in terms of trying to unlock the value of the land in order to create an endowment that ensures its ongoing preservation, both of the land and their programming. And so I look at a similar thing here with, the beans. They're trying to preserve the land, make it a viable go from a commercial standpoint, and not have to develop it. Does the environmental consultant weigh the highest and best use in the event that he can't do that because the land stays as a meadow and that land is developed? How does that impact the highest best use of that meadow?
Can I address that? So we hold the CR on the 28 acres that we hold the CR on. And what is happening to neighboring land doesn't really weigh in on our role with respect to the CR that we're looking at, right? We're not allowed to consider what the neighbors are doing if we're focusing on. So we're trying to do is get our report from the scientist about the habitat value of the field as is, and just make sure there's nothing, super protected, or just get that information. And then we can balance that with a good farming program. And as long as the land trust board can agree that, it would be equivalent and no major loss of, conservation value protection, there's no reason why there couldn't be farming. But this is just a little preliminary because we don't have that written report yet. But if you have wild land has value too.
Oh, I'm not saying that it doesn't by any stretch.
Okay.
I'm just saying that if there were wild land and all of a sudden there was, a paved area that was developed for homes or something else, then that would have an impact in all likelihood on whatever habitat and birds, wildlife that were occupying that meadow. I would have to believe it would have an impact.
I want to give Joe a chance to weigh in. You're on mute, Joe.
Thank you. I guess I'd be heartbroken if we didn't have some sort of farming operation there. And I certainly appreciate and respect the land trust. They've done so much great work. So this is certainly not a black and white issue. What would be helpful to me though is I hate guessing, and I've got several maps, and I think we had a plot plan submitted. But I'd sure like to know exactly where the 8 acres are on this as we go down the road. And then I have some other questions about the farm stand, but as Pat said, that those are questions that we can discuss later.
Yep.
Would it be possible to get some sort of sketch? I'm sorry.
Oh, Nancy, you're on mute.
There's a plan of record, the conservation restriction, which you guys have a copy of. There is a plan of land that's recorded with the conservation restriction. If
Right.
that's helpful.
But that also includes planting field brook. I really don't see it unless I'm looking at the wrong thing, but this is what I'm looking at. Is that what you're referring to, Nancy?
Yes.
Yes, the plan
Okay.
that was recorded with the conservation restriction.
Right, and there's area 1, area 2, and area 3.
Right.
So where exactly would Chris like to do is farming?
The portion that's about 8 acres that's closest to the road. And that is not delineated on that map on record.
Yeah, well, I
Okay,
don't
so we're
think
not
there's a sketch plan, an exact survey delineating the 8 acres.
Oh, I'm not asking for a survey
Yeah.
plan. I'm just asking for a sketch plan to get an idea. I don't want to do that to Chris.
So we actually have a very full agenda tonight, so I want to try to center this discussion. I think we have consensus on the board that this is clearly this is town property that we own, that we want to support the Bean Farm. It would be a huge loss for that, for the Bean Farm to no longer be in existence. It would be a huge loss if that property were sold off to become a parking lot, which would, to Rob's point, just from a layperson, I'm not an agricultural expert, but I would imagine that putting a parking lot next to this meadow would not be good for the habitat and all that lives there. So as far as a timetable, we're looking at mid-November to get this report back. We do have a meeting. Our next meeting is November 13th. It might be perhaps a good idea to keep this on the agenda for that meeting. In the meantime, I wanted to raise the idea that our land, this land that we're talking about, is in the care and custody of the Conservation Commission. As such, it might make sense to refer this to them for their recommendations so that we're ready to go and proceed forward in the meantime. So I throw that out to my colleagues for your thoughts on that plan. That being, and Chris Coleman, please weigh in on perhaps putting this on our agenda for our November 13th meeting. Hopefully we might have some feedback by then, but perhaps we could get an update from Concom in referring this to them for their approval. What do you folks think?
Well, I guess I would ask Karen, is that something, a timeline you feel your environmental consultant can meet? Right? Because I mean, I think there's certainly some valuable discussion to be had. But I would want to have that at that meeting on the 13th and not have to kick it into December if we didn't have to.
Right. I'm really not sure if it could be for the 13th because he has not been on the property yet. It said it'd be this week or next week, weather permitting. So, and then there's a written report after that.
And the board needs to review the report as well. So.
Yes, and so we would hold a special meeting of the board to review the report and then we would make a decision. That's, I mean, the Conservation Commission, I mean, they can make whatever decision they could advise and question, but until we present we vote on it, then that's what will make the final ruling.
Okay.
I'm not sure I agree with that assessment legally, Karen, with all due respect. I think taking the temperature of the Conservation Commission to see if they're interested in allowing farming there is really the first step the town needs to do. And certainly the land trust would have to vote to allow it as well, but I don't see why the select board couldn't refer to the Conservation Commission to see where they stand on this issue.
Okay, so do they hold the property? Is it under select board or
custody control? No, it's care custody control. Tax rolls have it under the Conservation Commission.
Okay, thank you. Yep. Understood.
Marianne, can I say something there?
Sure.
I like where you're going. I like to, because I understand the time constraint. I like what you're doing, but Conservation Commission is going to be in a tough spot, Pat. It'll be hard for them to offer an opinion without a resource delineation.
Well, I understand. Let's.
Yeah, if you might get the temperature, okay. Okay.
Well, I think at this point, we could, at the very least, refer this to the Concom for their consideration as to potentially leasing the land for farming. And perhaps also expect a report back from the land trust in December at our December meeting. Does that make sense as a plan, Rob, Joe, Chris?
Yes.
Marianne, if I could, I think if everyone on this call who lives in Westwood and have friends, given that this is a great time of year to visit the farm, the Christmas trees will be delivered in the not too distant future. And we have a tremendous amount of people that have been visiting the farm, probably record numbers, and they continue to ask a lot of questions. I spend a fair amount of time at the farm, as does my wife. And one of the things that we continue to hear, and Chris continues to hear, is the viability of the farm. And so the one thing that we're trying to avoid is that it's in a tough spot. You know, Chuck and I we've decided that we want to make sure that everyone knows that things are going along, but it's important for him to maintain and to grow, to have that tract of land. What we're trying to avoid is the town to be in a bit of an upheaval about the potential of the farm closing. Because again, one thing that has not necessarily been crystal clear for a lot of people in town and a lot of people on this call is where we are 2 outs in the ninth on this. And so it's important that we use as much expeditious language and time as possible to move forward with this, because time is truly of the essence. And the town folks, I know, will be wildly upset if there's some sort of scenario where Chris has to shut it down. I want to make sure we're all on the same page with that.
Thank you. I don't know that we need a vote on this. Pat, correct me.
One last comment. I'm really sorry. I know you're in a hurry. I have a graduate degree in ecology. And
could you please identify, ma'am, excuse me, could you identify?
Oh, I'm sorry, Susan Murray from CMAP. So I'm a farmer. I'm the executive director of CMAP. I also have a graduate degree in ecology. And if an ecologist goes in there and does a habitat assessment, they're going to find that the best conservation purpose is conserving that meadow. That's what ecologists do. Having seen both sides, having the degree in ecology and being a farmer, you need both sides. So you're going to look at the habitat. You're going to look, I know they're going to look for threatened and endangered species and threatened and endangered habitat. But you don't have anything to compare it to. You don't have a working farm that includes both hay habitat, hayland, and crops. You don't have an assessment of that to compare it to. So what is the species diversity in a working farm that has mixed crops, including hayland, versus a meadow? So you have nothing to compare it to. So if you're just looking at the meadowlands, the best conservation purpose, it's very subjective and not objective, because you only have one thing. You have nothing to compare it to.
Susan?
So I have, as a farmer, I have animals, I have chickens that I have pasture land. Once the chickens go through, we put it into row crops. And then a couple years later, we put it back into pasture land. So there are ways of managing farms that maintains habitat diversity, both in the soils, with insects, with bird populations. But if you're not comparing the two, how can you say which one is the best way to manage that land?
Susan, you're not asking our expert to tell us what's the highest and best use. We're just asking them to weigh in on what's currently there. And that exercise is exactly with balancing with what good farming would do. So I would invite you or Chris or whoever work together and submit a similar, a short paragraph or something that could explain to the land trust kind of what kinds of farming they might envision doing and what kinds of habitat that would provide. That would be fantastic. That's exactly what we're trying to get to. But at this point, we don't even have an inventory of what we have ecologically, just as a meadow. So we're not asking for some ecologist to tell us what the highest and best use is. Just want to make sure that's absolutely clear. No, we need to get the report on the inventory
to help us.
But we're not asking them to weigh in on the highest and best use. We just want to know what we're going to lose if, what are we going to lose by changing it from a wild meadow to a farm? And I would hope that people would respect that.
I would
just getting that input.
I would just add that there'll be a lot to gain by transferring it to farm, and the ecosystem thrives on the pest population feeds off a certain percentage of crops. Maybe Chris, you could just speak to that quickly.
Yeah, I think that land could gain from having active agriculture on it and improve the soil properties and the health of the soil and the ecosystem around it. I'm using regenerative farming practices and trying to convert over to minimal till on my farm, and I'm heavily cover cropping my soils to build organic matter and soil health for the future of the farm. I think there's a lot of ways that we can utilize that type of agriculture on this new piece of property to take it from an open meadow that isn't providing to food security in the area and transfer it into agriculture and conserve the open space of the property, while also, feeding the community and having the community benefit from not only the open space of that property, but the multitude of acreage that we have on our property in open space and agriculture.
Thank you very much.
Madam Chairman, if I may.
Please.
There's two comments in the question and answer that I think should be read into the record just for completeness.
on this topic? Sure. Thank you. The first one, John Cummings, 4 Chickadee Lane. Farming is the backbone of America. What kind of community are we if we turn our backs on the only family farm in Westwood? If the CR of the meadow allows for farming, please vote in favor of allowing farming of that land. Please allow this family tradition to continue. And then Grace Weller, 48 Clapboardtree Street. In reference to Rob's question, a meadow benefits local wildlife and native species of both flora and fauna in a way that agriculture does not. Those are the 2 comments. So I want to make sure, Rob and Joe, we have consensus on referring this matter to the Conservation Commission, and looking to put this back on our agenda in December, with understanding all of the work that's going to go forward in the interim. Does that sound like a plan?
It does.
Okay.
Yes.
I want to thank everybody here for all of the work that you do in our community, and for being here tonight on this very important issue. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Very much. Appreciate all your time.
Thank you for your time. We'll be talking soon.
Okay, thank you. All right. We are now going to move into new business on our agenda, the first item of which is a discussion of a potential special town meeting dates. This is in follow-up to our last meeting, at which we discussed the potential design for a new fire station, and we asked Chris and the team to research this and get back to us regarding potential funding sources for designing the fire station, as well as options for moving forward to include a special town meeting. So Chris, I will turn this over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes. So I want to thank the team that worked through this with me, Dottie, Tish, Molly, Stephanie, and Pat. We looked at our process, which includes the select board process as far as the work leading up to a town meeting, the FinCom's process, the posting of the warrant, as well as the holidays over the next 3 months. We did look at 3 dates, December 5th, which does not really meet, does not really provide us with sufficient time to go through our process. One of the challenges that we have with the month of December, and being respectful of the holidays within that month, is we have Hanukkah, which is from December 7th through December 15th, and we also have Christmas on December 25th. So being mindful of Hanukkah, we then looked at the week of December 18th and did not think it would be a good idea to recommend to the board to call for a special town meeting a week before Christmas. So then we looked at dates in January after the holidays. We looked at January 8th and we looked at January 16th. Excuse me, January 17th, I apologize. And our recommendation is, after consultation with the town clerk, with the town moderator, speaking with the chair and the vice chair of the FinCom, a recommendation would be for the select board to consider holding a special town meeting on Wednesday, January 17th. This meets the timelines that we have in our charter, as well as the process, as well as it does enter slightly the period in which the town, including the FinCom and the school department, we work on the FY25 budget process, but it's very early in that process. So certainly appreciate the openness of the town clerk, the town moderator, the FinCom chair, vice chair, as well as the team talking about this. That would be the recommendation for the board's consideration for a special town meeting.
Thank you very much, Chris, and thank you to everybody on the team that worked. The process is very important, particularly going from the select board and then the FinCom process as well. And so thank you for taking all of that into account. Joe, Rob, any comments or questions?
Yeah,
Sounds
man, Go ahead, Joe.
I said it sounds good to me. Thanks, Rob.
Okay. You know, as I looked at the various dates and the timelines, the other reason I think that that's probably the best is, you know, with not only the work that would need to be done and or the challenge in scheduling, you know, something the week of you know, right leading into Christmas, right on the heels of Hanukkah, is when you're looking at the January 8th dates, you would have a mailer that would be coming in the midst of the deluge of mail that comes with, you know, all the holidays and everything else. So I think that getting to the other side in a relatively clean fashion makes the most sense of the three.
Chair?
I agree with
I
it.
apologize. I'd be remiss if I didn't say that also the school department was working with our new superintendent as part of the venue was also very important. So we certainly appreciate his openness and willingness to assist us in this process.
I agree with what you said, Rob, and just to further that point, you know, a number of folks go away over the holidays. You know, kids are out of school, so you know, I think getting later, just that little bit later into January, hopefully we'll have folks back from those kinds of vacations. So I think, you know, that is a good schedule. This is obviously an issue of urgency, given the time it's going to take to do the design work. And Joe, Rob, and I think we're all on the same page that we want to see that done as soon as possible, and that this is the most expeditious way to get that done. If there are no other thoughts or questions, we can take a motion to open the warrant for a special town meeting.
Yes.
Pat, hold on. Pat's got a comment.
I think you need to have a motion to hold a special town meeting first and then to open the warrant.
Okay. Thank you.
I move that the select board hold a special town meeting to be held on Wednesday, January 17th, 2024.
And don't talk about the inclement weather day because you may have to schedule that depending on the weather.
Yep, I was going to leave that out.
Thank you.
Yep.
I'll second the motion.
All right. Roll call. Joe.
Aye.
Rob.
Aye.
I vote aye as well.
Now you can vote to open the warrant, Madam Chairman.
All right. I will accept a motion.
I move the select board vote to open the warrant for special town meeting to be held on Wednesday, January 17th, 2024.
I'll second the motion.
Roll call. Joe.
Aye.
Rob.
Aye.
I vote aye as well. All right, Chris, do you want to take us through the next piece relative to articles? Would you like to take us through the next piece relative to articles for the warrant?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, at this time, I'd like to recommend 3 articles. One would be funding to design the fire station. Second article would be a bonding article. It would be a vote to abandon and then a vote to reappropriate. I don't know if that's the correct word. And then just in case we do have, we would have a miscellaneous article. But those would be the 3 articles I would recommend for the board's consideration at this time.
Thank you, Chris. Questions or comments, Joe, Rob?
None from me.
I'm good, Marianne. Thank you.
All right. Well, I will entertain a motion to close the warrant to include those 3 articles.
I move the select board vote to close the warrant, include 3 articles as laid out just briefly by Chris for the 2024 special town meeting to be held on Wednesday, January 17th, 2024, and to publish the draft article listing on the town's website.
I'll second the motion.
Roll call vote. Joe?
Aye.
Rob?
Aye.
I vote aye as well. Thank you very much. All right, moving on, our next agenda item is with respect to a veterans parking space at Town Hall. Chris, would you be able to take us through this?
Sure, I can. Madam Chair, just as a point of clarification, you also asked about funding for the design.
Yes.
So at your next meeting, after the board just voted, at your next meeting, which is on November 13th, we will be presenting a funding option to you. At this time, what we're considering is using a significant portion of the remaining ARPA funds, and then right now looking at free cash for the balance.
Thank you, Chris.
And thank you, Madam Chair. As far as the veterans parking lot, or parking space, excuse me, I apologize. We did have our deputy director for the West Suburban Veterans District that was on the call. Unfortunately, he had a family matter he had to leave for, so he sends his regards from that. This is under the Brave Act of 218 section 22A 3 and 4, which states that the town may designate a parking spot at Town Hall with a military plate. This passed in 2018 by Governor Baker, and it was improved on the Valor Act by Governor Patrick back in 2012. We have, after speaking with the commander of the Veterans, the Legion, we're recommending one space in front of Town Hall designated for veteran parking, to comply with this act, and certainly out of respect for the individuals who serve in our military. We have had conversations with town council. We've communicated this with the chief of police as well as Public Works. Public Works is ready to move forward by placing the proper signage in front of that space, and to do that before Veterans Day.
That's terrific. I'm completely in favor. Rob, Joe?
I just have one question, Chris. I think it's a wonderful idea. How does one enforce something like that? How do you know a vehicle is a veteran's vehicle or not? That's the other piece
So
that I'm.
some veterans, it's a great question. Some veterans have veterans plates. They actually have veterans plates that you have to be a veteran for. And our chief of police has reviewed the law and will certainly inform his department on how best to enforce that if someone does not have veterans plates. So we're confident within our police department to enforce this regulation and to work with those who park there legally and who may accidentally park there.
Good.
All right, I will accept a motion.
I move the select board to designate a veteran parking only parking space at Westwood Town Hall for the parking of a veteran in a motor vehicle that is owned by a veteran and displays veteran registration plate issued pursuant to Section 2 of Chapter 90 for the proper signage to be installed.
I'll second the motion.
Roll call. Joe?
Aye.
Rob?
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. Thank you to the team for bringing this to us. Very glad we could get that done in advance of Veterans Day, and with great respect for all our veterans in town. Moving on, we have a couple of grants, which is always wonderful to talk about. The first is acceptance of 2023 Sustainable Materials Recovery Program Municipal Grant Award. And who will be presenting on this?
Madam Chair, I can.
Thank you, Chris.
Yes, thank you. So our Westwood DPW submitted a grant application that would require Westwood's recycling solid waste program, which has been evaluated and demonstrated the likelihood of success. Past grant performance, including outstanding grant requirements, alignment with Mass DEP's priorities, Mass DEP's solid waste master plan, and other criteria determined by Mass DEP. Westwood has applied for this every year and attempted to increase funding through some other programs and enhancements, education and outreach. This has been something that our DPW team has been very passionate about, and very fortunate that they did apply for this grant, and that they have been awarded this grant contingent upon the select board's acceptance of this grant. This grant is in the amount of $5,390.
Great. Thank you, Chris. Questions, comments? If not, I will accept a motion.
I move the select board accept the Solid Materials Recovery Program, the SMRP municipal grant in the amount of $5,390 and authorize the town administrator to sign the contract.
Second.
Roll call, Joe?
Aye.
Rob?
Aye.
I vote aye as well. Thank you very much. And we next have acceptance of a Community Compact Grant Award. Presenting on this is Molly Keene, Director of Human Resources, Assistant Town Administrator. Welcome.
Hi, I will keep this quick as I know this has been a very full meeting. The Community Compact Program is a state program that gives grant funding to municipalities to promote best practices. So the Human Resources Department was reviewing the available topics, the available best practices, and saw one for a classification and compensation study. A classification and compensation study has an outside agency come in and review all of the job descriptions of all employees in town, as well as do a market analysis of other communities in our areas to see if we're paying above or below, the median average. Westwood hasn't had a classification and compensation study done in about 20 years, so it is time. I had submitted a capital request for this project, and so seeing the grant, I applied for it, and the state has awarded the town of Westwood $50,000 to conduct that study. And I'm hoping you'll let us take that money.
All right. Any questions, comments? No, thank you, Molly. Great work. I'll accept a motion, please.
I move the select board accept the Community Compact Grant Award in the amount of $50,000 and authorize the town administrator to sign the contract.
Second.
Roll call, Joe?
Aye.
Rob?
Aye.
I vote aye as well. Thank you again, Molly. Moving on to old business, we have final adoption of Westwood's Hazard Mitigation Plan. And Nora, I believe you'll be presenting on this.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
The Hazard Mitigation Plan was originally written in 2011 and it was updated in 2022. Was brought to the board and the board voted to adopt it. I believe that was back in February. It was then submitted to MEMA and FEMA, and we finally got comments back from both approving the plan, but they required that we make certain changes. The main change is changing the date on the title and throughout the text of the plan. So it had been called the Hazard Mitigation Plan Update 2022 because it was finished in December 2022. They asked us to change it to the Hazard Mitigation Plan Update 2023, dated February 2023. And so as a result, we're coming back to you to ask for you to vote again to adopt the plan now under its new title.
Thank you, Nora. I will accept a motion on this. If there aren't any comments or questions.
Hold please. I'm just trying to find the right page here.
70.
Thank you. All right. Joe, did you have any questions before I go into the motion?
Just gonna say it was a great job. I spent some time looking at that today. Very well done.
All right. I propose the select board approve and adopt the Town of Westwood Hazard Mitigation Plan 2023 update from February of 2023 and authorize the select board clerk to sign the certificate of adoption.
I'll second the motion.
Roll call, Joe?
Aye.
Rob?
Aye.
I vote aye as well. Nora, thank you to you and your team. This is and the whole team that worked on this. This is very significant and important work. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, moving on, we have approval of our minutes from October 11, 2023. Any edits, changes, additions? If not, I'll accept a motion to approve.
I move we approve the minutes from October 11th, 2023.
I'll second the motion.
Roll call, Joe.
Aye.
Rob.
Aye.
I vote aye as well. With that, we have public and press for the public that's hung around with us until this late hour. There are a few comments that came in on topics we covered earlier that I did not see. I think they came in after we finished our discussion. So let me just read through these. Gary Usalian, 9 Adams Street. We should create a design that is safe with reducing traffic and not just trying to get DOT funding. DOT is causing the traffic and they can fix it with a redesigned intersection. This is where we need a negotiator. There's one comment here without a last name, so I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to read that. I just remind folks we need your full name and your full address in Westwood. Beth Talea, I had read her address earlier, wrote, how are we walking on a bike path? Are we jump out of the way? Those e-bikes go up to 30 miles per hour. Shelley Reber made a comment, please do not make a decision until the public participation has occurred. The shared use path is 10 to 14 feet. This is more than 3 feet wider than a sidewalk, per Todd's comment. And let's see, Kate LaCroix, 590 Dover Road, wrote, related to discussions of land use, conservation, and protection of resources in town that have come up in this meeting. I wonder if the select board can comment on when it might be able to provide a public update on the status of discussions about the hail conservation restriction. The topic has not been opened up for public comment in quite a while, and it is a time-sensitive issue. I would simply say that while that's not on our agenda, negotiations have been continuing on that. Comment from Sandy Hart, 174 Pond Plain Road. The Town of Westwood Comprehensive Plan 2020 recognizes protecting land as a key action item. The plan includes identifying open space and setting priorities for acquisition or protection. Permanent protection of hail will ensure that the largest open space in town will remain undeveloped for future generations. I urge the select board to present an update on the opportunity to preserve the land that Hale owns so that the townspeople understand where the initiative stands. And that is all that I have for public comment. With that, our next meeting is November 13, 2023 at 6 p.m. Thank you, everyone, for, oh, Pat, you have a point?
Are you going to review minutes? I'm sorry.
I think we did.
We did.
Oh.
It was a brief one.
Yeah.
Okay. Mary Ann, can I just go ahead?
I'm sorry, I was just testing you.
Yes. Go ahead, Joe.
I just have a small indulgence to ask of Chris, because shoot, man, I know I seem like a pain because I have it on my calendar to ask you at the start of every month what's happening with the left turn signal. And today I got a nice handwritten note from a resident who is obviously frustrated. Could you please, for the record, give folks an update on where we stand on that?
So I know Nora's here, but I believe we just received some information that we're expecting something by early November. Nora, is that correct?
So we received a traffic study on Friday, the 20th, and that was immediately sent to Beta for their peer review of that traffic study. They obviously could not turn it around by tonight, so we're requesting that they present to the select board at your next meeting on November 13th.
Great.
I promise not to ask you between now and then, Chris.
All right, with that, I
Thanks,
will.
Mary.
I
I
will
said
accept. Hello?
I said thank you.
Oh, okay.
Motion to adjourn.
Yes. Do we have a second?
Second.
Roll call. Joe?
Aye.
Rob?
Aye.
I vote aye as well. Thank you, everyone, and good night.
Good night.
Good night. Nice job.